Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we'll be breaking down the 10 commandments of 2020 fantasy football drafts. I imagine a bunch of you listeners out there have your home drafts coming up, and the goal today, go through some key takeaways after spending the last 6 months on this season. And to accomplish this, had to get a very special guest on the show, one of the sharper dudes in the industry, staff writer at The Ringer, host of the Ringer Fantasy Football Show, Danny Kelly. Danny, how's it going, man?
It's going really well, man. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited about this show. It's kind of a fun one. You know, there's more like philosophical ideas that we got to get through. And I'm excited for hearing your ideas and kind of seeing what you think of mine.
Yes, sir, man. And yeah, it's exactly, man. Philosophical. We're getting philosophical today, man. That's what we're gonna do. We've done positional breakdowns, values, fades, dynasty rankings, team previews, all that base stuff already. The one missing ingredient has been breaking down, some of these bigger picture storylines, like things that we, yourself and me, have been entering fantasy drafts, relying on. Let's get after it, man. What is your first commandment of 2020 draft season?
Okay, so my first commandment, I think, would be to stick to ADP early in your draft. So, don't stray too wild in terms of, where you're going with guys in your first 3 rounds. But then from there on, honestly, swing for the fences. That's kind of my whole idea. Get your guys. If you're going through either Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, whoever, I guess the idea is don't be afraid to kind of scroll down the rankings a little bit and pick out your guy, even if it's going to be perceived as a reach in your home league or wherever you're drafting. If you think Antonio Gibson is going to be Christian McCaffrey reborn, don't worry about it. Just reach a little bit. That's fine. I'm not saying abandon all idea of value. But I'm saying, go out, get the guys that you think are going to smash. Don't worry too much about the rankings on ESPN, Yahoo, or whatever. So I think that's kind of my first sort of overall commandment is come out of the draft with a team that you like, not a team full of good values. I feel like every time I've come out of a draft thinking I got good value on everybody, but I'm just not really excited about my team. I think those are just not, fantasy football is supposed to be fun. So go out and get the guys that you like.
Man, I was falling into that exact trap last year, I thought specifically because, you get into these drafts and, round 8, 9 comes around and you see someone that you're not in love with, but the value's there. And then guess what? You look back on your team after the draft, you're like, why'd I even take this guy? I didn't even want him there.
Yeah, totally. That's the same thing that happens to me all the time in auction drafts too. I'm like, oh, this guy can't be that cheap. This is absurd. And then I end up going for it. And I'm like, I don't even really want, there's probably a reason this guy was falling or whatever. But I think that's kind of my main philosophy is, even if you end up with a lot of the same guys on a lot of your teams, get the guys that you really believe in, not the guys that are technically values wherever they're ending up.
So yeah, that first point you made, sticking to ADP early, not getting wild. I feel like we're both talking about Leonard Fournette here. And look, as awesome as 2019 was for everyone, I just feel like there's so many just glaring red flags here. Lowest win total at 4.5 in the league. They brought in Chris Thompson. People say he's going to get hurt. The guy's been playing 10 games a year, and he's got the one offensive coordinator in the league that we know wants to feed him. Are you kind of on the same page as me here where I just don't want to take Leonard Fournette ahead of some of these top 12 wide receivers that are still going to be on the board when you're taking them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely on that board. I've been fading Fournette this year. I was a big kind of proponent of him last year, but I think you're absolutely right. They didn't pick up his 50-year option. He's going into his contract year. It doesn't really feel like they have a long-term plan with him, which I guess on one hand could be they'll run him into the ground this year, but I tend to think more they'll be interested in kind of seeing what they get from other guys. It might be more of a committee approach. There's not even really a guarantee that he's going to be on the team the whole year. So it's just one of those things where he's not a guy that I'm taking in that range. His ADP is just too high right now. And like you said, there's other guys in that range. If I'm going to take a running back in that range, there's other guys I don't know, Chris Carson or, even a Cam Akers or DeAndre Swift that I'd probably rather take a risk on than having a guy like Fournette who hasn't really shown that he was worth that draft capital in the first place. So yeah.
Look, if he falls to round 5, fine. We hate ADPs. We do not hate players. But round 3, I am good. All right, so my first commandment I want to get off my chest is I think people need to do a better job considering where the receiver lies in their team's passing game's pecking order and not just their position. I mean, not every number 2 wide receiver is going to be their team's number 2 pass game option. We have high end, running backs, tight ends. You look at certain situations in the league where we do have 2 clear-cut top wide receivers. I mean, the Falcons, Browns, Lions, Colts a little bit, Rams, Dolphins, Steelers, Seahawks. And I don't think it's any coincidence that we see the number 2 wide receivers on these teams really having a lot of hidden value. I mean, the whole offseason, Marvin Jones, Preston Williams, Deontay Johnson, even Cooper Kupp a little bit. But you see these guys, the pricing discrepancy just doesn't really match what we see target-wise. And then the other side of things, when you have someone like maybe a Curtis Samuel in the world where, he's their number 2 wide receiver, but, not every team has a running back soaking up 130-plus targets per year like McCaffrey. I mean, I just think it's really important to remember where a guy is in the overall passing game, not just their specific position.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a really good point. The first thing that I was thinking about too when you brought that up is like tight end position. Like ideally you want a tight end to be like at least top 3, maybe like even like top 2 in terms of the pecking order in that passing game. And if you're getting like a 4th or 5th option in any team's passing game, it's just like that limits the ceiling a lot. And even if they're the tight end 1 on that team, but you just got to kind of worry about all the guys in front of them, how they're going to distribute the football, just getting the overall volume, the routes he's going to run, things like that. It's what makes, most of these, like most tight ends are after tight end 6 or 7 is like, it's just like this really big plateau of guys that could like break out, but we don't really know. So yeah, that was exactly what I started thinking about too, is the tight end position in that like thought and that mindset. It's important to kind of remember how high on the pecking order these guys are.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to your original point where, in our later round picks, we should be swinging for the absolute fences. So, give me someone like Noah Fant, where even though, they're in this offense where we've added Hamler, I mean, Fant was the first round pick himself. It would not be surprising at all to see him be the number 2 guy in Denver when it's all said and done, versus, someone like TJ Hawkinson, who's an awesome talent, but I just don't see any scenario where he's going to be anything better than number 3 option in that passing game. Maybe the talent wins out, but just really keep an eye on that pecking order. Danny, what's your next commandment?
All right, so my next one is hitch your wagon to high-scoring offenses or offenses that you think are going to be really good. Now, it's not like a hard and fast. You only can take guys that are in good offenses because obviously if you find a really good value late in the draft, a guy that's falling for whatever reason, don't be afraid to grab him. But I just think overall you're going to feel better week in and week out and well, number 1, you're going to feel better after the draft ends and week in and week out with guys that are on teams with like that higher ceiling. So I don't need to be the one to tell you to draft guys on like the Chiefs or the Cowboys, but I kind of like to target teams I think might be a little bit better and a little bit more explosive, than people might think. You brought up the Broncos. I think that's an interesting idea too. Like maybe the Broncos could be a little bit more high octane, a little bit more like high volume than people think. The 49ers are quietly like a really good, really efficient offense. They're going to score a lot of points. So, targeting that really uncertain kind of passing game right now could really pay off. The Buccaneers are going to be a good team. The Falcons, I think, are going to be a really good offense. So just overall, like, as they're like, I'm not going to need to tell you to pick Julio, but like, go for offenses that have that ceiling. They're going to be in the red zone a lot. They're going to be scoring a lot of points. They're going to give your players, your fantasy team, more chances to score points. And generally speaking, it's just like I don't like to look at offenses that are going to be running like slow, like really slow offenses that probably aren't going to be scoring a lot of points. A good example is like I did an auction draft the other night and I got Keenan Allen it's a dynasty league. I got him for $14 in a $250 budget. And I was like, oh, that is a really freaking good value. But then I was thinking about it. I'm like, I don't really know. Like he's my receiver 1 on this team. And I don't know, like, I don't really feel that good about this right now. Like, to be honest with you, I think he's an amazing player. And he's been a wide receiver 1 in the past, but with Tyrod Taylor, or if Justin Herbert ends up winning the job, I just think that offense, they're going to be really run oriented. They're going to probably want to slow things down, play really good defense. Got what could be a really good defense. So just overall, I'm just not super excited about that. That's kind of like how I look at it. And like you want to come out of the draft like a good afterglow, like a good feeling, and it just wasn't there for me.
I feel like my biggest, just L I took last draft season was I was, full on OJ Howard hype train. Tight end 4. I was buying him there. I thought everything
Yeah.
was going to come to fruition. Bruce Arians doesn't use his tight ends. He's never had a tight end like OJ Howard. But the big takeaway I had from that was, okay, and when we had a situation like that, Evans was going top 10, Godwin's going like top 15 or something. Like, you just really better be sure that that offense is good enough to enable, more than your 2 token, high-end fantasy performers. I mean, we have that many guys at the top. You just got to take a step back sometime. And that has led me to, moving Mike Evans down a little bit. As great as a player he is, I just have my doubts if they're going to be able to enable 2 top 10 wide receivers again. I mean, it has me moving Cooper Kupp down a little bit because I don't think the 2020 Rams are going to be as good as the 2018, 2019 Rams. Not everyone can hit, and we got to take stands on guys at some point in these offenses that we don't think are going to be top 10.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
All right, so my next commandment is that dual threat players, and I'm talking about rushing QBs and receiving RBs, are fantasy football cheat codes. And, I think people know this. They prioritize this. We just see it with the players at the top of the rankings as it is. But truly, man, I mean, 65% of QBs that have averaged at least 5 carries per game have been a top 12 fantasy quarterback since 2010.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where, like, you're getting so much production as a rusher that even when the passing game isn't as good as it should be, like, you only get, 0.04 points for like every passing yard. And when you're getting literally 2.5 times that for every rushing yard you're getting, it's just a cheat code. And it's the same thing with receivings. I mean, imagine if every single rush attempt started 10 yards downfield. That's the advantage you're getting in these full point per reception leagues. And I don't think, I think there's something in the middle. It might have been an article on The Ringer actually a year or two ago where the idea was that, points per first downs might actually be a better, live like way to kind of replicate fantasy football to reflect reality better. Because right now, you see a guy getting a screen pass and stopping the line of scrimmage. Like, why is that a whole fantasy point? It's not even reflecting what's hard. So, I mean, even though I'm like lower than I probably should be on guys like James White, Tariq Cohen, players that you wouldn't necessarily be picking first in the game of backyard football if it came down to something like that. Just we need to realize just how valuable a reception and rushing yards for QBs are in today's fantasy football.
Would you include, these guys are like less common, so it's probably not like a big factor, but like receivers that can also be used as running backs and stuff? Like Robert Woods comes to mind as like a guy that he's going to get like 15, 20 maybe jet sweeps a year. They use him a little bit as like a rusher. Players that kind of have that hybrid role, does that ever factor into your like rankings or anything like that?
I think it helps as a great tiebreaker. I mean, that's why I have Woods over Kupp, because similar target projection, I'm taking Woods. And yeah, it only really applies, I'd say Robert Woods, Curtis Samuel, and Tyreek Hill are the only wide receivers that see enough to factor in there. But hey, man, I mean, maybe that's like the next evolution of these NFL offenses too. Why not get your playmakers a few more design touches per game?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about it, I'm wondering what, assuming Ayuk is healthy, what the 49ers will do with a guy like Ayuk. They obviously, Deebo Samuel was kind of a hybrid last year. What Washington is going to do with a guy like Antonio Gibson. This might not be the year for Gibson. It might be like next year or whatever, but just something to keep in mind. Like, there's a lot more, it feels like a lot more hybrid guys coming into like the mainstream nowadays. And I think that's only going to continue to grow. And so, yeah, that's probably something that, you don't have to really think about too much, but I think it's interesting kind of going forward in fantasy football.
It seems like more of these players are seeping into the league, and it's always a struggle because we can't always assume rational coaching that these guys are going to be used in the exact manner they should. But a little bit like basketball, I do think we're seeing a little more like positionless football going on. Hopefully, we see these Antonio Gibson's dual threat talents of the world continue to get, their chances as rushers and receiver. All right, Danny, hit me with your commandment number 3.
Number 3 is beware myopia or recency bias. Like,
nice.
Just number 1, like the first thing that comes to mind is like, obviously I think it's not like a secret that the Steelers are going to be a lot better with Ben Roethlisberger out there, but it feels like the ADP of some of these guys, Roethlisberger, Juju, Deontay, and, James Washington, even James Conner, all these guys are really, their values are depressed based on what happened last year. And that was largely related to the fact that Ben Roethlisberger only played 1 game or 2 games, whatever it was really early in the season that he got injured. And so all these guys' values, which the Steelers had the worst offense in the NFL last year. And you can kind of look at that. And the point is just like, look back a little bit further when Ben Roethlisberger was actually under center. Like, this is one of the most high volume, high octane passing games. James Conner obviously had a little bit of injury on like bad luck last year. He's going to come back. Hopefully he'll be healthy, but he's a great value, I think, where he is. So all those guys, I think, are really good values. I'm actually going to disagree with you about the Rams. I think the Rams have a chance to be really good this year. I think they're going to have a big bounce back. Now, I'm not necessarily thinking they're going to be like as good as they were 2017, 2018, but I do think Goff is going to be a QB1. I think their receivers are appropriately probably priced, but I think Goff to me is like the really good value in that area. And then also Cam Akers, who, he's a rookie, and there's talk of him trying to have to platoon with Henderson, but I don't know. He feels like a really good value for me too, because like Sean McVay wants to run the ball, man. Like as much as they pass, and they pass a lot. Like I think Goff led the NFL last year in pass attempts. As much as they pass, like he wants to be a run team. That's like in his DNA. That's why like Gurley was such a big part of their offense for a couple of years. I think if they get Cam Akers involved in like the screen game like Gurley had earlier in his career, he could really go off and be like a league winning type player. So I think I'm buying Akers right now. I'm buying Goff as bounce back guys. And so basically my point is like, don't get too caught up in kind of everything fell apart for the Rams last year. And a lot of it was, just their offensive line just was bad. But I think McVay will go into the season with a better plan for kind of like reacting to that this year. We saw that in the second half of last year. So those are two teams, the Rams and the Steelers. I think also like look at the Lions with Stafford. Stafford was going off the first half of the season before he, hurt his back and was missed for the rest of the season. They're a team I think that you can get value from, because I think they'll be a good offense despite kind of all the narratives about how terrible the Lions are. I think that with Stafford under center, I think Darrell Bevell is a good offensive coordinator. Same could be said. I think Swift is pretty interesting where he's at right now. DeAndre Swift, although he's kind of got a little mysterious injury happening right now, but I think if he's healthy, I think he's a good value. A couple other teams whose offenses I think could be better than people are thinking because of like recent happenings. The Panthers, the Broncos, who I brought up. I think the Bengals are really interesting. I think there's a lot of really interesting Bengals, like Auden Tate.
Yeah.
I know, aren't you a big Auden Tate guy?
Hey, I like guys that make tough contested catches. Who cares if it can't separate?
And I think, dude, Burrow is the type of guy who's just going to throw it up for him, honestly. Like Burrow, everything we've heard about Burrow in the last like month of training camp is that he's just balls of steel, and he's going to be really, really good. They obviously are going to have issues protecting him, I think, but I don't know, man. I'm kind of interested in buying Bengals because I think that he could be really good as a rookie. I think guys like John Ross, obviously Tyler Boyd, AJ Green, there's just like, they have a chance to be a really good offense, or at least a lot better than we think. And so that could be a little bit of value there. So that's kind of like my overall point is like, just don't get too stuck on what happened last year or parts of last year. Think about like the overall big picture.
Yeah, I think it's more important than ever not having preseason. Now, like, we're only going off of these training camp videos and coach speak. And
Totally.
preseason was already fluky enough if you're just looking at it from, like, production and performance. But, having the first team reps was always really crucial for us fantasy minds out there. It's a good point about the Rams. And, I wouldn't be shocked if I am wrong because as quote-unquote bad as that offense was last year, I mean, they were 12th in scoring. I think it was more just they weren't quite the same powerhouse. And in that, end of the season stretch that has turned everyone in the industry into Higbee truthers, apparently. I think Jared Goff was like the QB5 in fantasy points among that stretch. So, there's enough volume, it'll make it work. But I think the really good, point from that entire commandment is just, try to make sure, especially now without these, first team usage, let coach speak. If you're going to trust it, make sure it's meeting historical tendencies. Like, that's why I'm in on James Conner, because when Mike Tomlin comes out and says, I'm a featured runner type guy, James is better as a featured runner. You look at 2014, 2018, that's all the Steelers used. So I do feel confident in taking Tomlin's word for it. Then we got McVay coming out saying, we have 4 good running backs we feel good about. Man, McVay has coached 52 games with the Rams, and his RB1 has played at least 60% of the time in 48 of those games. Now, maybe, they don't have Gurley, so it's different. Maybe he changes. But, yeah, man, Cam Akers, I feel like sooner rather than later is going to be the dude in L.A.
Yeah. And, this Henderson injury, I think he has a hamstring right now, Darrell Henderson, and that is, that could definitely hurt his chances of having like a big role early on in the season. And honestly, Akers could just run away with the job. Yeah. So, yeah, he's a guy that I'm trying to buy in Dynasty right now a lot.
For sure, man. All right. My next commandment: don't simply assume regression without looking at the potential for more volume. I think we make this mistake a lot. And, Hayden Winks from Roto World, real sharp guy, came out with a cool study looking at the quarterbacks, because we've had 18 with a touchdown rate above 7 since 2000. And those guys the next year were averaging 2 more pass attempts per game. So you're getting an extra 30, 40 pass attempts per season. So, yes, you're seeing the touchdown rate decrease for these quarterbacks. We expect it to decrease for Lamar Jackson. But it's because you can't be that good 2 years in a row. It doesn't mean he's not going to fall off the map in terms of fantasy land. And, when you are that good, guess what? The coaches give you more opportunities because of how good you just were. And, this has been the big thing. I am, maybe not president of the A.J. Brown Club, but, I'm definitely a longtime member, and I'm on him as a top 10 wide receiver in 2020. And I understand he's not going to, he's not going to break the PFF database for most yards after catch per reception again. He's probably not going to average 12.5 yards per target again. But this guy didn't even play 50% of the offensive snaps in a game until October. And we're just sitting here, oh man. Like, he's going to get more than 80 targets. The Titans' game plan isn't going to go quite as well. Just don't yell, hey, regression, without assuming more volume. It infuriates me, man.
Yeah. I actually have, on the Ringers Fantasy Football Draft Guide, I have A.J. Brown as one of my 8 guys this year. And it's because, like exactly what you said, they're not going to be able – I don't think they're going to be able to do the thing where they run Derrick Henry like 40 times in a game and have Tannehill like not throw the ball. They're going to need to throw the ball. And yeah, Tannehill and that offense probably going to regress a little bit in terms of their efficiency. Like, he's not going to have 9.5 yards per attempt or whatever like he had over the second half of last season. But I do think he perfectly fits their philosophy. It's just like, DK Metcalf, like what they ask him to do, he's perfect for. Catch a slant and get yards after the catch, go deep, whatever. And like, I just think there's definitely the chance that people are kind of like assuming too much that he's not going to get like 120 targets. I mean, imagine what he could do with that. Oh my God. Like, imagine like the upside. So I'm all in. I love AJ Brown. I just think he's an awesome player too. And it's just kind of fun to have guys like that on your team.
One of my highest owned wide receivers in best ball this year. I mean, look, I understand you got your big 5 wide receivers. Depending on how you feel about Hopkins, maybe your big 4. But after that, we just have questions for all the guys. Even your Chris Godwins of the world that were also that good last year. I mean, changing quarterback. There's just a lot of outlying issues.
Variables.
Yeah, a lot of variables, man. A lot of questions. So, if I am going to take a risk on the guy, let's make it some just absolute beast like A.J. Brown. And everyone out there, if you do want to play a little best ball, underdog fantasy, code PFF, go get you into $1 million. And hey, if you win the whole thing with A.J. Brown, remember who told you to go there.
Flip him a chip or two.
Exactly, man. All right, Danny, hit me with your next commandment.
All right, so the next one I got is don't be afraid of uncertain depth chart hierarchy. So I guess people aren't generally like afraid of these things, but I think you hear people say like, I'm just going to like avoid Washington's backfield. I'm going to avoid Denver or Detroit's backfield or whatever. And all the research and studies, JJ Zacharyason's done a bunch of this on where breakout players come from. Is a lot of the times it's in these uncertain depth charts, like either at receiver or running back, where going into the year, it's not exactly clear who's going to handle the majority of the volume and who's going to get like all that volume. And I guess it's a little bit scary to do this early in the draft, clearly, and I get that, but like in the middle and the late rounds, like don't worry about it. Like if you think that one of these guys in Washington, whether it's Antonio Gibson, Peterson, or Bryce Love, is going to be the guy, like don't worry about like reaching a little bit and drafting him. The Patriots are also one of those teams that's like, this looks like a hellscape of a backfield in terms of like who's going to get the most carries. But if you really believe in Damian Harris, and right now he's the cheapest, like go for it, So that's kind of like the idea is like, late in the draft, if you're looking for a good breakout potential type guy, it generally comes from uncertain depth charts, uncertain hierarchies in terms of who's going to get the volume. So don't be too afraid of what looks like a mess, because it could, in a few weeks, it could have like more clarity on how that looks. you might miss on the guy, but I mean, honestly, a lot of late round picks miss. So like, don't worry too much about it.
And like that's usually why their ADP is as low as it is in the first place. And I mean that's why this whole offseason, man, the Giants and Texans receivers to me have been prime targets because none of these guys have had an ADP really within the top 30 the entire time. Will Fuller's starting to creep up there finally, but it's one of these situations where if we can assume health at least a little bit with these guys, like there's no way Deshaun Watson's going to play 16 games and not have a single wide receiver finish in the top 30. So all those guys' range of outcomes, if things go really well, they could legit finish as a wide receiver 1. If they have the talent, they can do that. And they're being priced right at their floor, man. I feel like it goes back to your first point. Be safe in the early rounds, but hey, in the later rounds, shoot for the damn stars.
Yeah. I love the Giants example too. That's a really great point. Like all those guys, whether it's Shepard, Tate, or Slayton, they're all priced like right around the same area. And, you could end up having one of these guys have 100 targets, 120 targets or whatever, and like totally way outplay their ADP. So, I guess the bottom line is like, don't be turned off by like a messy depth chart.
100%, man. All right. My next commandment. I want everyone out there to target the 4-ish 3-down handcuff RBs in drafts of all shapes and sizes. And you mentioned before, but JJ, Mr. Late Round QB, incredibly sharp guy, been awesome for the industry. He brought up a good point, how you don't want to actively target your own fancy RBs handcuff. I mean, if you have Zeke on the squad, you should draft Latavius Murray over Tony Pollard because there's not going to be a scenario where both Zeke and Pollard ball out. But if you have Zeke and Latavius, I mean, that could happen. I agree with him, but I'm saying, if you can get Latavius and Pollard's there around later, add him too, because there are not 32 like high-end handcuffs in this league. I think there are 4. There's Tony Pollard, Latavius Murray, Chase Edmonds, who could have some standalone value, we'll see, and probably Alexander Mattison. I mean, you have your Boston Scotts of the world and Darrington Evans and maybe some guys that can get there. But to me, those 4 are the guys where if the starter goes down, they are, going to be RB1 fantasy, probable 3-down role, and you just don't have that across the rest of the league. I mean, it's, even situations like Carolina where for a while people were wondering like Reggie Bonifant could be that guy, and now Mike Davis is apparently like passing him. I mean, you can't just assume a backup running back would walk into that role. We fall into this trap mid-season all the time. Remember all the Ty Johnson fab stuff from the middle of last year? Like, it gets messy, so don't worry about those complimentary Kerryon Johnson, Marlon Mack types who, even if injuries happen, like they're not going to get that featured rollback. Give me the guys where they're not going to give you anything most weeks until they do, and then it's top 12 production.
That's got to be especially true, I think, this year, with all the potential for guys missing games. Obviously it's a factor. If COVID hits a team, then you could have like legitimate missing several guys in a game, and it just could be chaos. So having those guys already like parked on your roster could be like a big advantage for you. So definitely. I like that one. I don't really have anything to add. I'm right in line with you on that one. I think.
Yes, sir.
I will say though, there's like these whispers that Pollard is going to have standalone value, but I don't know if I really buy it quite yet.
Man, I was all aboard the slot wide receiver RB2 hybrid role until they drafted CeeDee Lamb, man. It's just a little too much there. I don't know. He's got the talent to do it, man. I don't know what they're putting in the food in Memphis to bring out Pollard, Gibson, and Henderson. You just got these broken tackle beasts everywhere. But
seriously.
Yeah, man. Quick reminder, not one of our commandments, and I know people preach this every year on draft season, but if your league does not force you to draft a defense or kicker, if you still have those half-breeds in your league as it is, I mean, don't do it. Go get this backup running back. We still have weeks until the season starts. As you said, more chaos than usual. Won't hurt to have a backup on the squad if all hell breaks loose. Danny,
absolutely.
What is your 5th and final commandment?
So this one is only half serious, but I kind of wanted to talk about it because I think it's funny and it's kind of interesting. We broke out a new segment on the Ringer Fantasy Football Show the other day called Anti-Lytics, and it's basically like all the things that are like not actually sticky and like don't actually matter, but they actually do matter when you're making decisions. So like best shape of my life guy, whether it's like training camp highlight, like we were talking about before the show, like Bryce Love, just like there's this one clip of him running half speed and everyone was like, oh my God, this guy looks like he's running in sand. So like, I think my commandment is analytics do matter. And my biggest one is that dunking, if you can dunk, you're going to be a stud in the NFL. And Henry Ruggs is like the poster child for that. That dude is just like insanely athletic. And there's some really cool like highlight videos of him dunking. And I think that matters. And I think that he's going to be a big time player this year because he can dunk.
I love it, man. I do think there is something to like looking at these variables that just show you like who are the athletic just marvels out there on the field. And to me, like broken tackles is one of those. Like you aren't getting fantasy points for broken tackles, but you know when I look at who the leaders were last year in broken tackles per touch, and Josh Jacobs is coming in at number 1. Like even though I'm not going to draft him because of his ability to break tackles, I feel more comfortable taking a risk on the guy because I feel like the natural talent and the ability just to be an alpha is there, as there is with Henry Ruggs. So I'm also on board with you, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I was like half kidding, but I absolutely agree with you. Like, you know, there's like all NFL athletes are good, like they're all good athletes, but there are definitely like levels of athlete in the NFL, and like really elite athletes are more often really good at football. Like the best players are usually elite athletes. So, or at least at certain skill positions, and like running back, like you said, like Josh Jacobs was amazing at, you know, yards after contact. I was just looking at DK Metcalf's Instagram, and he was doing these like side lunge or side jumps over like literally like up to like his pecs, these like hurdles. He was like side jumping them. I'm like, this dude he's not like a normal guy. Like this guy is one of the most athletic players in the NFL. Like, I get that he can't turn fast, but like it just doesn't matter, man. Like he's just gonna go get the ball. He's a beast. So yeah, I was like half kidding, but I just wanted to like throw that one in there too.
I like it, man. All right, my 5th and final commandment. Now I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one, but I do want your opinion on it because I can't really go a show these days without mentioning his name. It's draft Chris Herndon, everyone.
Yes,
please draft the Jets' potential number 1 wide receiver, more likely number 2 or number 3 receiver. But seriously, please do it. I mean, if you have Kelsey, Kittle, or Andrews, fine. You probably don't even need a second tight end on your roster. But when the guy's going as a tight end 19, we saw him as a rookie, you know, just put his name up there with a ton of just all pros and future Hall of Famers in terms of efficiency. And then literally from Coach Adam Gase's mouth, he is our starting tight end. Chris gives us a lot of flexibility. He complements the guy's pass catching ability. You know, whenever a coach says a guy like can block well enough, he doesn't have to block well enough that he doesn't need to take him off the field, like that means something to me. And when Gase like hasn't been able to say more than 1 or 2 nice things about Le'Veon Bell for like the last 2 years, and he goes out of his way to, you know, really compliment Chris Herndon, that does mean something to me. So, you know, again, I'm sure everyone out there has heard me talk about him enough, but Danny, are you with me on the Chris Herndon train?
100%. I just drafted him as like my tight end 1 on one team recently, and I'm like hoping that pans out. You know, you gotta get like maybe a little bit of insurance, but I think he's like one of those guys that absolutely fits the mold of a breakout tight end. You know, he's super athletic. He's gonna run a lot of routes, I think, which is obviously really important for the receiver or for the tight end position in fantasy. The other thing is, like, I was going through and watching some of his snaps like a couple of weeks back. This guy, he makes some incredible catches. Like he makes circus catches where he's going up in traffic, twisting and turning, and like snatched the ball out of the air. Like
the Packers one.
What's that?
The Packers one-hander, man. I know exactly what you're talking about. The dude's a baller.
I mean, yeah, and so like that's the kind of stuff you're like, man, this guy needs more opportunities. Last year was a wash because he was like suspended, and then I think he got hurt, and then it just like didn't work out for him. They kind of just went with Ryan Griffin instead. They're like sort of just like, you know, he missed the boat kind of deal. But yeah, I think he's got a real chance to like be like a real breakout, build on that really strong rookie year. Sounds like he has really good chemistry with Sam Darnold, which is important, especially in a season like this where they got like, for whatever reason, the Jets are like rehauling their entire receiving core again, you know, like after all this, like poor Sam Darnold. And like having that chemistry and that trust, I think will be important. You know, that's kind of one of those like, you know, intangible things, but I do think it will matter, especially in a season where you don't have any preseason games, you don't have many reps, all that stuff. So I love Chris Herndon. I think he's, you know, there's a lot of really like late round tight ends that could break out, but he's like at or near the top of that list for me.
Absolutely. And, you know, I hope on your Chris Herndon tight end 1 team, you drafted another tight end. I'm sure you did, just to help mitigate that risk. There we go. But yeah,
another
man.
sleeper.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, dude, it's one of those things where he's just so cheap at this point. Like, why wouldn't you take a flyer on this guy? And why would Jonnu Smith and Blake Jarwin, any of these tight ends? Go ahead, get 2 or 3. Don't be afraid to cut them once we get more clarity when the season starts. But yeah, man, 2020 Chris Herndon, 2019 Darren Waller. You all heard it here first. Danny, man, that's going to do it. Everyone follow Danny on Twitter at Danny B. Kelly. What do you guys got coming up? What do you guys got going on over at The Ringer?
Check out the Ringer Fantasy Football Draft Guide, which is at theringer.com. And then also the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. It's a new podcast with Danny Heifetz, Craig Horlbeck, and I. We had been on the Ringer NFL show feed, and we're now on our own feed. So yeah, go ahead and find that on Spotify or wherever you find your podcasts. The Ringer Fantasy Football Show. Check it out.
Awesome stuff, man. Thank you again for coming on. Can't say enough good things about the guys at the Ringer. All-time favorite website for me will always be Grantland, but the Ringer obviously is right there next to it. So thank you again, man. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. That's Danny Kelly. I'm Ian Hartitz. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.